Hello. What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, and today I'm bringing the energy, folks, because I have an absolutely amazing Pokemon card auction recap for you. In today's episode, we will be reviewing the much anticipated crash in the graded prices of the Pikachu Van Gogh promo cards. We'll be comparing some BGS 10 Black Label cards to their PSA 10 counterparts and noticing the crazy disparity in those prices. And last but not least, if you love sealed product, then you are going to love today's video. Community, thank you so much for all of your support. I appreciate it more than you know. A quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor, KantoShark.com, the ultimate Pokemon card marketplace. KantoShark.com currently has more grails listed than ever before on their marketplace. And these cards are getting grailier by the week, folks. Just check out some of the newest drops they've added in the past few days. They don't just offer high-end Pokemon card slabs, but they also offer very affordable graded cards as well. So after this auction recap, head over to KantoShark.com and see what you can pick up to add to your collection. And as always, let me know what kind of deals you pick up. Alright everybody, we have eBay, PWCC, and Heritage auctions to go through. Let's get started on eBay, starting off with the PSA 10 Pikachu Van Gogh promo card, which last week was selling in auction for 1,375 big ones. So let's go over a few sales that happened this week. We saw a few PSA 10 examples sell. Here is one for $970, and then it sold for $770, and then it sold for $630, and then lastly landed at about $620 for a Gem Mint copy. But it is worth noting that a CGC 10 Pristine copy of this card sold earlier this week for $1,150. However, there are a whole lot more PSA 10s on the market than there are CGC 10 Pristine copies, so we'll keep an eye on both of these grades for weeks to come. Up next, a few graded examples from the newest 151 set. Here's an Alakazam EX Special Illustration Rare that sold for $197. Here's a Special Illustration Rare Erica's Invitation Trainer card that sold for $212. Here's a Blastoise EX that sold for $250. The Venusaur EX hit some pretty impressive numbers, selling for $440 this week, and the Charizard EX Special Illustration Rare sold for $615. Now on to the PSA 10 versus Black Label cards. Here we have a PSA 10 Amazing Rare Celebi from Vivid Voltage that sold this week for about $13 plus $5 shipping. Now on the other hand, we saw a BGS 10 Black Label sell this week for $485. And to break that down for you folks, the Black Label cost 27 times as much as a PSA 10 copy. We also saw a PSA 10 Radiant Venusaur from Pokemon Go sell for about $28, while the Black Label copy sold for $405. Here is a Radiant Charizard that sold for $44, while a Black Label copy sold for $810 this week, which is 16 times as much as a PSA 10. And then lastly, for our Black Label comparison, we saw this PSA 10 Charizard VMAX from Shining Fates sell for $162.50, while a Black Label sold for $1,600. So, there you go. Before we get into the sealed product that sold on eBay, let's go over this lot of Celebrations Classic Collection cards that all graded PSA 10. Which includes 2 holographic Charizards. You got the Gold Star Umbreon, the Blastoise Venusaur. All these cards sold for a grand total of $521. And these are all PSA 10s. And just like last week's Amazing Rare lot that sold a couple years ago, this lot would have sold for thousands of dollars, especially back in late 2021. Yeah, it was crazy back then, folks. Up next, just a few sealed booster boxes to go over. Here is an XY Phantom Forces box that sold for $1,938, while this XY Flashfire box sold for $2,639. Here is a Dragon's Exalted booster box that sold for $2,900. And then we saw this Diamond and Pearl base set booster box sell for $3,806. And lastly, on eBay, we saw this Heart Gold Soul Silver Undaunted booster box that sold for $5,421. Up next was the PWCC weekly and monthly auction block. Here we have a CGC10 First Edition Pichu from Neo Genesis that sold this week for $2,010, which is still a far cry from the price it was selling a few weeks ago, which was around $3,700. Here we have a 1997 Japanese Top Sun Blueback Pikachu card in PSA 10 that sold for $2,370. And then we had 3 PSA 10 First Edition base set booster packs that were graded. Here is the Venusaur art that sold for $3,360. Blastoise art sold for $3,600, while the Charizard art sold for $4,440 this week. We saw 2 very notable cards from the E-Series. Here's a holographic Gengar from Skyridge, sold for $3,840, while the Holo Umbreon from Skyridge sold for $3,960. And then we saw the OG Moonbreon from Neo Discovery in PSA 10 that sold for $4,800 this week. We saw a couple of the Warm Pikachu promo cards come by. Here's one that sold as a PSA 10 for $3,120. This one here sold for $2,520. Here's one that sold for $4,080. And this one also sold for $4,080. Here is an Umbreon EX from Unseen Forces that sold as a PSA 10 for $4,200. And then we saw 2 base set Blastoise cards. Here's the Unlimited copy that sold for $2,220, while a Shadowless PSA 10 example sold for $5,880. A couple of notable Charizards came by. Here is a Charizard G Level X from Supreme Victors that sold as a PSA 10 for $1,860. And then here's the Holo Charizard from EX Crystal Guardians that sold for $2,520. And then we saw this magnificent Stormfront Charizard. It is a reimagining of the base set art and sold for a whopping $11,100 this week. And then the card that sold for the most on the weekly auction block was this 1996 Japanese Bandai Prism Charizard card that sold for $17,400. And then we saw 3 very notable Pokemon cards from the monthly premiere auction. Here is a PSA 10 First Edition Shining Charizard from Neo Destiny, sold for $8,100. We saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint First Edition base set Charizard sell for $35,700. And then we saw this Japanese Champion Road Trophy card. This is the second place winner, graded by MBA, and it sold for $37,200. On to the crazy amount of auctions that occurred on Heritage yesterday. We have this pretty awesome lot. It is every single card, every single chase card from Evolutions, all of the EX cards, full art cards, holos, regular holos that is, the break cards, all graded PSA 10, sold for a grand total of $4,250. So yeah, if you are a lover of Evolutions and you were looking to complete the whole set like that, I mean, I think that's a pretty good deal. What do y'all think? Especially for some of those very hard to grade holo cards like Chansey and Hitmonchan. Very hard to get your hands on those cards as PSA 10s. Up next, we saw an SGC6 Ishihara GX promo card, sold for $19,375 this week. And then we also saw this 20th anniversary Pikachu Festa card that sold for $8,125. Getting into the vintage portion, we saw this 10 million units sold phone card, graded a BGS 10 Pristine, sold for $3,250. And then here is a 1996 Japanese Charizard Trainer Vending card in Gem Mint 10 condition that sold for $15,625. Up next, we saw a couple of base set Charizards. Here is one graded a CGC 10 Gem Mint and sold for $3,375, while a PSA 10 knocked it out of the park this week, selling for $11,250. Here is the Reverse Holo Charizard from Legendary Collection, graded a PSA 10, sold for $11,875. We saw a few awesome cards from the Neo series. Here is a First Edition Typhlosion 17 as a BGS 9.5, sold for $2,312, while a CGC 10 Gem Mint copy sold for $4,500. Along with this CGC 10 Gem Mint First Edition Lugia, that sold for $8,125. Couple of pretty expensive Japanese Shining cards. Here is a Shining Kabutops in PSA 10, sold for $5,125, while this Japanese Shining Magikarp sold for $6,250, and the Japanese Shining Gyarados sold for $6,875. Here is a PSA 8 600-point fan club promo card of the Shining Magikarp that sold for $4,125. Up next, we saw a couple of the Daisuke Club 7,200-point promo cards. Here is the Espeon Prime that sold for $18,750 as a PSA 10, while the Umbreon Prime sold for $36,250. Here we saw a raw Victory Ring Pikachu unnumbered promo card with the original frame that sold for $17,500. And then we saw this Miracle Diamond unnumbered promo card with the original frame and box, and it sold for $33,750 big ones. And then we're going to finish off this auction recap with an absolute insane amount of sealed booster boxes. Let's start at Jungle. A first edition Jungle box sold for $12,500. First edition Fossil box sold for $10,625. And then we saw a very healthy price for the base 2 booster box, selling at $11,875. This box usually doesn't crack the 5-figure mark, but today it did. Up next, we saw the first edition Gym Challenge box sell for $13,750. And then one sealed box from the Neo series. It was the first edition Neo Destiny box that sold for $42,500. A couple of sealed Diamond and Pearl boxes came by. Here's a Great Encounters booster box, sold for $5,250, while this Stormfront booster box sold for $8,750. From Black and White, we saw this Next Destinies box sell for $4,250, while this Black and White Plasma Freeze box sold for $3,250. Here we have a Black and White Legendary Treasures booster box that sold for $5,250. And then here's a little bit of modern for you. We saw this case, this distributor's case of 6 Evolutions booster boxes that sold for $4,500. And man, it wasn't that long ago you could pick up these cases for less than $600. Now, all the way up to $4,500. And then we're going to finish off this auction recap with 3 base set boxes. Here is a first edition Dutch base set booster box, sold for $14,375. Here's an unlimited base set booster box that sold for a big total of $17,500. And then the auction of the week has to go to the sealed first edition base set booster box, which sold for a grand total of $206,250. Whew, that was a lot of booster boxes, folks. I really hope you enjoyed this auction recap. Give it a like if you did, and don't forget to be a subscriber. I would greatly appreciate it. That's all I got for you today, folks. I really thank you so much for tuning in. It means so much to me, and I will catch you all in my next one.